Story 1. I've been a backcountry ranger for 11 years. I've slept alone in the woods more times than I can count. I've handled lost hikers, aggressive bears, flash floods in the dark. I thought I'd seen everything this forest had to offer. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday in late October. My assignment was a routine patrol of the Slick Rock Wilderness area, about 17,000 acres of pure backcountry, no maintained trails, no cell service, no other rangers within radio distance most of the time. I'd done this loop maybe 30 times before. I knew the terrain the way some people know their own neighborhood. I set out at 4 a.m. with my headlamp and my pack. The plan was to reach the ridge by dawn, check on a few trail cameras we'd placed to monitor wildlife activity, and be back at the truck by early afternoon. Everything was normal for the first 2 hours. Then I found the fire. It was small, just embers really, tucked into a shallow depression between two old hemlocks. Someone had built it carefully. Stones arranged in a circle, char marks showing it had burned for a while. But here's the thing. This area is closed to the public. No permits, no exceptions. The gates were locked. You'd have to hike in 8 miles from the nearest legal trailhead to reach this spot, and even then, you'd need to know exactly where you were going. I radioed it in. Got static. That wasn't unusual. The valley kills most signals. I photographed the fire site and marked my GPS coordinates. Then I noticed the food, hanging from a low branch maybe 10 feet away. A stuff sack, the kind backpackers use to hang their food from bears. But it wasn't hung high. It was just dangling at chest level, like someone had put it there in a hurry, or like someone wanted it to be found. I didn't touch it. I stood there for a moment, listening. The forest was quiet, which sounds normal, but this was a different kind of quiet. No insects, no wind through the leaves. Not even the distant sound of the creek I knew was about 60 yards to my east. Complete silence. I started moving again, quicker than before. I told myself it was probably just a hunter who didn't know the area was restricted. People wander in. It happens. I was halfway through rationalizing everything when I looked up and saw the figure. Standing on the ridge above me, maybe 200 feet away, just standing there. Dark clothing, or maybe just dark against the early gray sky. I couldn't make out a face, but I could tell they were looking in my direction. I raised a hand. Standard thing to do. Show you're friendly, you're a ranger, no threat. The figure didn't move. I kept walking, watching them over my shoulder. After maybe 20 steps, I looked back up at the ridge. They were gone. I stood still for a full minute, scanning the tree line. Nothing. The ridge is open up there, sparse, rocky, no cover to duck behind quickly. To disappear that fast, they would have had to run. I didn't hear running. I pushed on to the first trail camera. It had been triggered. The motion sensor log showed 47 captures in the past 6 days. Normal for wildlife. I pulled the SD card to check later. When I got back to the station that afternoon and loaded the card, the first 39 images were exactly what you'd expect. Deer, a raccoon, once a black bear at dusk. But the last 8 images were different. They were taken at 3:47 a.m., 17 minutes before I'd left my truck. All 8 photos were of the same thing. A person standing perfectly still at the edge of the camera's range. Different angles, slightly, like they'd moved a few feet between shots. But in every single image, they were facing the camera directly. Not walking past it, not looking away, facing it, like they knew it was there. The last image was the closest. Whoever it was had walked right up to the lens. Their face filled the frame. Their eyes were open, wide open, and they were smiling. I have never gone back to that zone alone. I requested a partner for all backcountry patrols after that. My supervisor approved it without asking questions. I don't know if that bothers me more or less. Story 2. My training officer always said the first solo night patrol tells you everything you need to know about yourself. Whether you've got what it takes, or whether you belong behind a desk. I was 23. I'd graduated top of my class. I was absolutely certain I had what it takes. Route 421 cuts through the mountains along the Tennessee-Virginia border like a scar. It's winding, narrow in places, and at night, in late November, it becomes one of the loneliest stretches of road I've ever seen. My patrol area covered about 40 miles of it, plus the Forest Service roads that branch off into the dark. I started at 10 p.m. Everything was textbook. I checked 2 trailhead gate locks, logged a dead tree close to the road, radioed my check-ins on schedule. I was actually enjoying myself a little. The fog had rolled in low and thick, which made my headlights push out about 30 feet, but I was going slow and careful. Around midnight, I noticed a car on the side of the road, hazard lights on. No one inside that I could see. I pulled up behind it and ran the plates, came back clean, registered to a woman in Kingsport. I got out, walked up to the driver's side, and shone my light inside. Empty. Doors unlocked. A cup of coffee in the holder, still steaming slightly. I radioed dispatch. They said they'd send a deputy to check it out and that I should note the location and move on. Routine stuff. I did exactly that. But 40 minutes later, further up the route, I came across another car on the shoulder. Same deal. Hazards on, empty, doors unlocked. I ran the plates. Different owner, different town. I radioed it in. I kept driving. 20 minutes after that, a third car. By now my confidence had taken a serious hit. 3 abandoned vehicles on the same road, on the same night, in the same fog, with apparently no one in them. That's not routine. I radioed dispatch again. They sounded confused, said no accidents had been reported. No one had called in any emergencies. Then the radio cut out. Not static, not a signal issue. It just went dead, completely silent, like the whole system had powered down. I checked the unit. Power light was on. Everything looked functional. But nothing was transmitting, and nothing was coming through. I pulled over and sat there in the dark for a moment, thinking. That's when I saw the person in my rearview mirror. They were standing maybe 30 feet behind my vehicle, in the road, just standing there, facing me. The fog made them look like a shape rather than a person, but I could tell they were upright, still, and looking directly at my truck. I put my hand on my door handle, then stopped myself. Something told me not to get out. I watched the mirror. The figure didn't move, didn't walk toward me, didn't wave, just stood there in the fog and the dark, perfectly still, while my hazard lights blinked red light across the road in slow pulses. I put the truck in drive and pulled out slowly. Watched the mirror the whole time. They just kept standing there, shrinking as I gained distance. My radio came back on 30 seconds later, clear as anything, like it had never stopped working. I drove straight back to the station, didn't stop once. The deputy who was sent to check the abandoned cars found all 3 of them exactly as I'd described them. No damage, no signs of anything wrong. By morning, 2 of the cars had been towed. The third, the first one I'd found, was gone when the tow truck arrived. No report was ever filed explaining where it went. I've done dozens of solo night patrols since then. I always check my rearview mirror more than I check the road ahead. Old habit now. I can't seem to shake it. Story 3. 6 weeks alone in a cabin will change you. That's not me being dramatic, that's just fact. The station was about 14 miles from the nearest paved road. No neighbors, no foot traffic except the occasional hunter in season. My assignment was resource monitoring, checking water levels in 2 streams, documenting wildlife patterns, maintaining a weather station. Quiet work. I actually asked for it. After a difficult divorce, I thought the silence would help. By week 4, the silence had become something else entirely. It started with the knocking. 3 knocks, always 3. Always at the back door, the door that faced the forest, not the service road. The first time I heard it, I assumed it was a branch. Wind, settling wood. Cabins make noise, I know that. The second night, 3 knocks again. I got up and opened the door. Nothing there. Tree line about 20 feet back. Dark. Still. Third night, same thing. But this time, when I opened the door and shone my flashlight into the trees, I saw footprints in the mud right up to the back step. Fresh ones, human-sized. Leading up to my door, not leading away. I grabbed my radio, my sidearm, and my flashlight, and did a full perimeter check. Nothing. Nobody. The footprints just stopped at my door, like whoever made them had simply vanished into the air. I logged it and tried to move on. But then other things started happening. My equipment would be moved. Not dramatically, just slightly off. A clipboard shifted. A coffee mug on the wrong side of the counter. My boots inside the door when I was sure I'd left them on the porch. Small things. The kind of things you could explain away one by one. But after 12 days of it, you stop explaining and start counting. I started sleeping with the light on. The worst night came in week 5. I woke up at 2 a.m. for no reason, just snapped awake, heart going fast, that feeling like something had disturbed the air. I lay there and listened. The cabin was quiet. Then I heard breathing. Not outside, not through the walls, inside the cabin. Slow, regular breathing, coming from the corner of the room nearest the front door. I couldn't see the corner. The lamp was on the other side of the bed, and the far corner was in shadow. I didn't move for what felt like 5 full minutes. Then I reached over and grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand and turned it toward the corner. Nothing there. But the front door was open. Not hanging open, just slightly ajar. An inch, maybe 2. Enough to let the cold in. I had locked that door before I went to sleep. I remember doing it. I always do. I never found an explanation. I transferred out at the end of week 6 and requested a different station. They gave me one. No questions asked. Apparently, I wasn't the first ranger to request an early transfer from that particular cabin. Nobody ever told me why. Story 4. Search and rescue teaches you not to panic. It teaches you to think clearly when everything around you is chaos. I've been on over 200 operations in the Smokies. I've found people alive who should have been dead. I've found people dead who should have been fine. Nothing prepared me for the Brennan search. Kevin Brennan, 41, went missing on a Wednesday in March during a system that dropped 4 inches of rain in 6 hours. His wife called it in when he didn't come back from a day hike on the Alum Cave Trail. We mobilized within the hour. By Thursday morning, we had 12 personnel on the ground. I was leading the Eastern Sector team, 3 of us, covering the backcountry east of the main trail, where hikers sometimes wander when visibility drops. The rain had stopped, but the fog was still heavy. We moved carefully through old-growth forest, checking creek crossings, calling Brennan's name on a rotation schedule. By early afternoon, we'd covered most of my sector with nothing. Then my team member Joel stopped. He held up a fist, the signal to freeze and be quiet. We all stopped. I looked where he was looking. A yellow rain jacket, hanging from a tree branch about 50 feet ahead, just visible through the fog. We moved toward it. It was definitely a rain jacket, a man's size, soaked through. No name tag, but the color matched the description Brennan's wife had given us. I called it in and started looking for more signs. That's when I noticed the trail. Footprints in the mud, leading away from the jacket. Fresh enough that they hadn't filled with rainwater yet. Size 11 boot, deep tread. We followed them. For about 400 yards, the footprints were consistent. Steady pace, no stumbling, no signs of distress. A person walking with purpose. Then they stopped. Not gradually, just stopped. Mid-stride, one foot planted, the other in the air. We stood there looking at that last footprint for a long moment. Joel shone his light around in every direction. No signs of the ground changing. No rocks he could have stepped onto. No leaves thick enough to hide a trail. The footprints simply ended. We spread out and searched for 2 more hours in an expanding grid pattern. Nothing. No Brennan, no more tracks, no other clothing. We found Kevin Brennan the next morning. He was on the other side of the park entirely, the western sector, miles from where we'd found the jacket and the footprints. He was cold and scared and dehydrated, but alive. Here's what I can't explain. When I showed Brennan a photo of the yellow jacket we'd found, he looked at it for a long time. Then he told me it wasn't his. He'd been wearing a blue jacket. His wife confirmed it. We have her statement. We never identified whose jacket that was. We never found who made those footprints. And we never found a missing persons report that matched what we'd discovered out there. Whoever was walking in that forest on that day, they were never looking for help. Story 5. 22 years on the job. Let me tell you what 22 years does. It makes you skeptical of everything. Ghost stories, ranger legends, things that go bump in the night. I'd heard them all. I believed none of them. US 19 through Cherokee is a road I've driven so many times that I used to do it half asleep. It's tight and curvy where it runs along the Oconaluftee River, and at 2 in the morning, it's completely empty. That's what I liked about the night shift. No tourists, no traffic, just me and the mountain. The night I'm talking about, I was maybe 8 miles south of the park entrance when I saw the truck. It was parked on a pullout, one of those gravel areas where people stop to look at the river during the day. The truck was running, headlights on, nobody moving inside from what I could see. I pulled up behind it, hit my spotlight. Late model Ford pickup, in-state plates. I ran them while I sat there watching. No response from inside the truck. After 2 minutes, I got out and walked up. Driver's side window was down despite the cold. Inside, a man in his 50s, sitting upright in the driver's seat, eyes open, staring straight through the windshield. I spoke to him. Nothing. I knocked on the roof of the truck. Nothing. I thought he was having a medical event. I reached in and put a hand on his shoulder. He turned and looked at me, and I'm telling you, it took 2 full seconds for his eyes to focus, like he was coming back from somewhere very far away. He asked me where he was. I told him. He nodded slowly, said he'd been driving south, heading home to Silva, and he'd pulled over because he was tired. Said he'd just sat down for a second. But here's the thing. His phone was in his lap, and when he glanced down at it, his face changed. He'd been sitting in that pullout for 3 hours and 40 minutes. His phone showed a string of missed calls. His wife, his son, his wife again. He had no memory of any time passing. As far as he was concerned, he'd pulled over 30 seconds ago. I stayed with him until he calmed down, followed him to the edge of town to make sure he got there safely. On the drive back, I started thinking about how many times I'd driven past that pullout on previous shifts. How many nights I'd gone by without stopping. I started wondering how long he might have sat there if I hadn't come by. But then I thought about something else. His eyes, when I touched his shoulder. That 2-second delay before anything registered. The absolute blankness. I've seen people asleep. I've seen people in medical distress. I've seen people drunk, and I've seen people in shock. What I saw in that truck was none of those things. I don't have a word for what it was. I've thought about it many times since, and I still don't have a word. I stopped taking the night shift 2 months later. Told my supervisor I wanted days for family reasons. He didn't push it. I don't drive that stretch of 19 at night anymore. Not alone. Story 6. The tower was built in 1937. It stands about 60 feet up, above the tree canopy, and on a clear day, you can see for 30 miles in every direction. I loved it up there, truly. The solitude, the view, the feeling of being above everything. What I didn't love was what I saw on the 14th night. My assignment was 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, cycling through the summer. By late July, I knew the landscape below me the way a conductor knows a score. Every ridge, every clearing, every dark patch of old growth. I knew what didn't belong. The clearing was about 4 miles out, east-southeast, at the edge of my range. During the day, it was just an open space in the canopy where a few old trees had come down. At night, it was dark like everything else. But on the 14th night, there were lights in that clearing. Not fire. I know fire. This was different. Stationary white lights, arranged in what looked from my distance like a rough cluster. I logged it, noted the coordinates, and radioed it to the district office. They said they'd check it in the morning. I kept watching. For about 40 minutes, the lights just sat there. Then they went out, one by one, until the clearing was dark again. In the morning, the district sent a crew to check the location. They came back with nothing. No signs of anyone camping, no ash, no trampled vegetation, no garbage. The clearing was completely undisturbed. That should have been the end of it. 2 nights later, the lights came back. Same location, same cluster. But this time, there was something else. Movement between the lights. A shape, dark against the slightly lighter dark of the open sky, walking in slow circles. I got my binoculars. I stared at that clearing for a long time. The shape kept circling, methodical, regular, like something pacing a perimeter. At exactly midnight, I checked my log. The lights went out again. All at once this time, and the shape stopped moving. I radioed it in again, requested that someone go out there at night, not the morning. They said they'd try to get a ranger out there the following night. The following night, there was a ranger in the clearing with a radio. I could see his flashlight moving around. We were in contact. I described the lights and where they'd appeared. He stood right in the middle of the location I'd described and shone his light around. I was looking through my binoculars when it happened. The lights appeared, all around him, on every side. 8 of them, maybe 10. He didn't see them. He was on the radio telling me the clearing was empty. I was telling him to turn around. He turned around. The lights were gone. I don't know what I saw. I don't know why he couldn't see them. I finished my rotation the next day and requested a different assignment for the rest of the summer. Some things you can log, and some things you can't. What was in that clearing belongs to the second category. Story 7. I deal in evidence, track patterns, identify predators, relocate or remove problem animals. It's not glamorous work, but I'm good at it. I can read sign in the field, scratch marks, scat, gait pattern, fur caught on wire, and tell you what animal made it, roughly how big, roughly how long ago. I've been doing it long enough that I trust my reads. What I found along the Red River Gorge boundary in September didn't match anything I trusted. 3 farms had reported livestock kills over a 10-day period. 2 sheep, 1 calf, 1 goat. The kills were spaced along about a 4-mile stretch of the forest edge. Standard enough for a predator working a territory. I expected coyote, possibly a bobcat, or a young bear with unusual behavior. The first kill site told me right away that something was wrong. The calf had been killed cleanly. That part was unremarkable. But the way the carcass had been left was wrong. It was positioned, deliberately arranged in a specific orientation, legs folded under the body, head facing north. No signs of feeding, no tracks leading away in the direction a fleeing animal would go. The tracks, and there were tracks, formed a circle around the carcass. Walking tracks, back and forth, like whatever made them was standing there for a long time. The tracks weren't any animal I recognized. 4-toed impressions, roughly the size of my hand, with a gait pattern that didn't match any regional predator. I photographed everything and sent it to the State Wildlife Division. The next 2 kill sites were similar. Positioned carcasses, circular tracks. No signs of feeding. The Wildlife Division wrote back 2 weeks later, saying the track photographs were inconclusive. Possible coyote with an unusual gait. Possible human disturbance after the fact. I don't believe it was either. On my 4th visit to the boundary area, I drove out before dawn to check a camera trap I'd set up near the most recent kill site. As I walked the fence line in the gray pre-dawn light, I heard something in the tree line. Not moving through the forest, just standing there. I could hear it breathing, slow, deep, regular. Too slow for a deer, too steady for something afraid. I stopped and listened. The breathing stopped. I waited. I heard nothing. Then slowly, gradually, from maybe 20 feet deeper in the trees, the same slow breathing started again. Like whatever it was, had taken a few steps back and resumed. I backed away to my truck. I never retrieved that camera trap. I submitted my report, recommended against a predator identification conclusion, and requested reassignment. The livestock kills stopped the following week without any intervention on our part. I still don't know what was in that tree line. I've run through every possibility. None of them hold up. Story 8. I'm not a ranger. I worked in the state's Missing Persons Division for 16 years. But cold cases take you places. This one took me to the Blue Ridge Parkway in late September, alone, driving toward a location I'd been told might be relevant to a woman who'd disappeared 11 years earlier. Her name was Gretchen Albee, 34 years old, vanished on a solo drive down the parkway. Her car was found near milepost 176, driver's door open, engine still running, everything inside undisturbed. She was never found. I'd been reviewing the file for 3 months. Something about the original investigator's notes nagged at me. A reference to a witness who'd driven past the area that same evening and reported seeing a woman standing on the shoulder. Not in distress, just standing there, looking into the trees. I wanted to see the location for myself. I drove it in the late afternoon, same time of year, roughly the same time of day as the original disappearance. Milepost 176 is a stretch of straight road between 2 long curves, with deep forest on both sides and a pull-off on the east shoulder. I stopped at the pull-off, sat in my car for a moment, took out my notes. Then I got out and walked the shoulder. The forest comes right up to the road edge here. No barrier, just grass, then trees, then darkness underneath the canopy. I stood at the approximate location where Gretchen's car had been found and looked into the trees. And someone looked back. I say that plainly because I saw it plainly. A woman, standing about 30 feet into the tree line, standing completely still, facing the road, facing me. Dark clothing. I couldn't see her face clearly in the shade of the canopy, but the shape of her was unmistakable. A woman, standing there, watching. I called out, asked if she was okay. She didn't move. I took 2 steps toward the trees and she was gone. Not walking away, just gone. Like she'd simply stopped existing. The trees were still, the light was even. There was nowhere she could have gone in the time it took me to take 2 steps. I stood there at the tree line for a long time, breathing hard, telling myself it was a deer, a shadow, a trick of light. But I had my notepad in my hand, and I'd written down, woman, standing, watching, dark clothing, 30 feet, tree line, before I'd even made a conscious decision to write anything. I drove back in silence. I didn't play the radio. I've never been able to close the Albi file. Not because of lack of evidence. I'm used to that. Because every time I open it, I see what I saw at milepost 176, and I'm not sure anymore whether it helps or hurts the case. Some things you're not supposed to understand. You're just supposed to carry them. Story 9. When they called me back, I thought they wanted my records. 34 years worth of patrol logs, incident reports, trail documentation. I had all of it in a storage unit in Waynesboro. I said, sure, no problem. I'd bring what I had. What they actually wanted was me. Specifically, they wanted me to look at something and tell them if I'd seen it before. I had. The Skyline Drive is 105 miles long, and I'd driven it so many times I could do it in the dark, which sometimes I literally had. In the fall of 1987, during my 7th year on the job, I'd reported something to my supervisor that he'd marked in the log as inconclusive observation and moved on. The young ranger who called me, she was maybe 30, sharp, clearly competent, showed me a series of photographs, trail cameras, night vision. She laid them out on the table one by one without saying anything. A stretch of road, nighttime, and in every single image, something standing at the far edge of the frame. Different locations, different nights, always the same posture, upright, still, facing the camera. I sat with those photographs for a long time. In 1987, I'd been driving Skyline Drive at around 2 a.m., routine patrol, when I'd seen someone standing in the middle of the road about a quarter mile ahead. I'd slowed to a stop, lit them up with the spotlight. A person, standing in the middle of the road, facing my vehicle. I'd gotten on the PA and told them to move to the shoulder. They didn't move. I'd sat there for maybe 3 minutes, debating whether to get out. Then they'd simply stepped off the road into the trees. No hurry, not running. Just stepping off, casually, into the dark forest. I'd logged it as a disoriented hiker. My supervisor had signed off on it, and that was that. 30-some years later, I'm looking at photographs that show the exact same posture. Same stillness. Same position relative to the road. I told the young ranger what I'd seen in '87. She typed it into her report without looking up. When she was done, she asked me quietly whether I'd ever figured out what it was. I told her no. She nodded, said they hadn't either, and that the photos spanned the last 4 years and 14 different locations along the drive. I asked if anyone had ever gotten close enough to see a face. She didn't answer right away. Then she closed her laptop and said, "We think they can see the cameras." I drove home that afternoon in the kind of silence that doesn't have anything to do with noise. Story 10. 2 tours in Kandahar, 8 years Army Ranger before that. I've been shot at, mortared, and I once spent 3 days in a drainage ditch in conditions I'm not allowed to describe. I do not scare easy. I want you to understand that before I tell you what happened on the Jacks River Trail. I was patrolling a section of the Cohutta Wilderness in northwest Georgia, about 35,000 acres of some of the most remote terrain in the South. Post-storm patrol, checking for downed trees across the trail, erosion, any hikers who might have gotten into trouble in the weather. I was on foot, full kit, moving at a good pace. About 6 miles in, I found a tent. A 2-man backpacking tent, set up about 15 feet off the trail, in a flat area between 2 large boulders. It had been there through the storm. The rainfly was soaked, some water pooling at the base. I called out. No response. I crouched and looked through the mesh inner door. Empty. But occupied. Sleeping bag, backpack, boots sitting just inside the door. Someone had gone out in their socks, or barefoot, in a rainstorm. I marked it and continued the patrol, figuring whoever it was might be nearby, answering a nature call, or just hiking ahead. 3 miles further on, I found a fire ring. New fire. The coals were still warm under the wet ash. Next to the fire ring, arranged in a perfect line on a log, were 5 smooth river stones. I stood there looking at those stones. They didn't belong. The nearest river was almost 2 miles away. Someone had carried them there, arranged them specifically. I kept moving. Another mile, and I found a second tent. Same setup. Empty, but occupied. Boots inside. Sleeping bag. Backpack. Whoever had been there had also left without their shoes. I stopped then. Really stopped. 2 tents, 6 miles apart, both abandoned mid-stay. Storm conditions. Nobody on the trail. I got on the radio and called it in. They said they'd send another ranger to the southern entry point to sweep up. I turned around and started heading back. I was about halfway to the first tent when I heard someone walking behind me. Not far behind. Maybe 40 or 50 feet. Steady footsteps in the wet leaves. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I turned around. Nothing on the trail. Dense rhododendron on both sides. You couldn't see more than 10 feet in. I kept walking. The footsteps resumed. I've been in close quarters situations where my life depended on not showing fear. I drew on that then. I did not run. I walked at a controlled pace all the way back to the trailhead, 6 miles, with footsteps behind me the entire way. Every time I stopped, they stopped. Every time I moved, they moved. When I reached the trailhead in my truck, I turned around one last time and looked at the trail entrance. Nobody there. Just the dark mouth of the trail going back into the rhododendron. The ranger who came in from the south reported finding the 2 tents. Both were gone by the time he got there. Taken down, packed up, vanished as if they'd never been there. No one filed a missing persons report. No hiker ever claimed those tents. Story 11. I was 19, taking a gap year, and being a seasonal park ranger felt like the coolest job in the world. New River Gorge had just become a national park, and they needed extra staff for the summer rush. I applied on a whim, and somehow got it. I lasted the whole summer. But there was one night in July that I've never told my supervisors about. My job was daytime visitor contact, answering questions, monitoring overlooks, making sure people weren't doing stupid things near the cliff edges. Easy work. But one evening, a hiker came into the visitor center about 40 minutes before closing and said she'd seen someone sitting on the ground near the Long Point Trail, about 2 miles out. She thought they might be hurt. They were just sitting there, she said, not moving, and they hadn't responded when she'd passed. My supervisor had already left. I was the only one in the building. I made the call to go check it out. I drove to the trailhead and hiked out. The light was going. It was maybe 20 minutes to full dark when I reached the 2-mile mark. There was a man sitting on a log beside the trail. Older, maybe 65. Jeans, a flannel shirt, No pack, no water bottle, no jacket. He was looking at the ground. I said hello, asked if he was okay. He looked up, said he was fine, said he was just resting. I told him the park would be closing soon, that it was going to get dark, and that I'd walk him out. He nodded, said that was fine. We started walking. He moved slowly, steady, no signs of physical distress. I made small talk, asked if he'd come far, whether he was camping nearby. He didn't answer any of my questions, just kept walking, eyes on the path ahead. Halfway out, I asked him his name. He stopped, and then, very quietly, without turning to look at me, he said, "You shouldn't be out here after dark." I said, "Sir?" He said it again, same words, same quiet tone, like he was telling me something important and waiting for me to understand it. I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer. He just started walking again. When we got to the trailhead, he walked straight to the parking lot. I followed. The lot was empty except for my truck. He stopped in the middle of the empty lot and just stood there. I asked where his car was. He said, "I didn't drive." I asked how he'd gotten there. He didn't answer. He stood there for another moment, then turned and walked back toward the trail entrance. I called after him. He didn't stop. I stood there for a second, completely frozen, then ran to catch up. I got to the trail entrance maybe 10 seconds after him. The trail was empty. It was nearly full dark by then. I shone my flashlight in. Nobody. There is no way a 65-year-old man walked fast enough to disappear from a straight trail section in 10 seconds. There's just no way. I waited at the trailhead for 20 minutes. Then I drove back to the station, wrote nothing in my log, and sat very still at my desk until my hands stopped shaking. Story 12. I'm 68 years old. I've worked Jefferson National Forest since I was 24. In that time, I've seen the mountains change. Trees die and grow back. Roads open and close. Towns go quiet. I've watched this land long enough to know what it keeps. There's a road in the back of the forest that doesn't appear on any current map. It was decommissioned in 1978. Gates put up at both ends. The locals know it by the name they've always had for it. They call it the Hollow Road. I've never repeated that name in an official report. I've driven it maybe a dozen times over the years. You need a key for the gate, and there are only 2 of those in existence. One is mine. I took a drive out there in November. No particular reason. I do it occasionally. Call it a personal patrol. The road runs about 4 miles through a narrow hollow between 2 ridges. No structures, no utilities, no reason for anyone to be there. About a mile in, I saw a light. Firelight, orange and low, about 200 yards off the road to the north. I stopped the truck and watched it for a moment. Then I got out and walked toward it. It was a fire, a proper campfire, well built, burning steadily. Arranged around it in a loose circle were stones, not a standard fire ring, but something more deliberate, a pattern. I stood at the edge of the firelight and looked around. Nobody in sight. Fire crackling steady, coals deep red underneath. This fire had been going for hours. But what stopped me cold was what was around the stones. Items. Personal items. A wallet, open. Contents laid out neatly. A set of car keys. A phone, screen cracked. A child's shoe. Just one shoe. I'm not prone to imagination. I've told you that. But I stood there at that fire in the dark hollow, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 40 years of this work. I felt like I had stepped into someone else's story, like I was not supposed to see this, like the fire and the things around it were meant for something I couldn't understand and wasn't part of. I backed away slowly, got back in my truck, drove to the gate, locked it, drove back to my house. I sat on my porch for a long time. In the morning, I drove back with a deputy I trusted. We unlocked the gate and drove in. The fire site was cold. Every trace of the fire itself was gone. No ash, no scorched earth, no disturbed soil from the stone arrangement. The stones were gone. The items were gone. We walked the area for 2 hours. Nothing. The deputy asked me if I was sure about what I'd seen. I told him yes. He filed no report. I filed no report. We drove back in separate vehicles and never discussed it again. I'm telling this now because I'm retiring in the spring, and there are things that shouldn't go unrecorded, even if they can never be explained. I've carried this for 11 years. Whatever was in that hollow didn't want to be found, but it didn't try to stop me from leaving either. That's the part I think about most. It let me go. I've never decided whether that's a comfort or the most frightening thing of all.